The bar door swung open, and there she was, my wife, laughing with him. The scene burned into my mind, igniting a fury I couldn't control. I confronted them. Betrayal etched on both their faces. Rage consumed me, leading to an unforgettable showdown. How did it come to this? A web of lies, infidelity, and vengeance. This is the story of our unraveling. In the end, justice had a price, and I was ready to pay it. It was a late fall day. The trees still had bright colors, but the rain and cloudy skies made everything look dull. The gloomy weather matched how John Watson felt. He got out of his car and quickly went into the saloon for shelter. Inside, he took a seat at the end of the bar. His face showed his bad mood. This week had been really tough for him. A teacher in his department quit suddenly, so John had to find someone new. He had 3 interviews this week, but none of them went well. He wouldn't hire any of those candidates even for simple tasks. To make things worse, books that were ordered hadn't arrived yet, and students were angry about their heavy reading load. They were starting to complain to the school administration, but what worried him most was his marriage. "Hi, Professor. Welcome. Haven't seen you in a while." Chester greeted him as he cleaned the bar nearby. "Hi, Chester. Thanks. Can I have a scotch and water on ice?" Dr. Watson replied, glancing at the clock which showed it was just after 4 p.m. "Coming right up, Doc," said the bartender, going to prepare the drink. The drink came quickly, and John looked around. His eyes wandered to the dark wooden walls, the old light fixtures, and the cracked leather seats in the booths lining the side of the saloon. The place felt cozy, like a safe spot he had visited many times since he was a grad student years ago. His mind wandered back over the years. He saw himself as a young man, finishing his doctorate in American history. His writing on Henry Clay had been accepted by a publisher and would soon be in print. Plus, he had been offered a teaching job by the university, which he gladly accepted. The pay wasn't great, but he had been very happy. All his dreams were coming true. Esther, his girlfriend, had just graduated from law school and got a good job at a law firm in the city. They had been living together for a year, and John felt it was time to formalize their relationship. He saved up all the money he could and bought an engagement ring. The stone was small, but it was the thought that counted, he convinced himself. Esther had been so happy when he gave it to her, and his heart swelled with pride. Together, with their 2 paychecks, they could manage quite well. They planned their wedding for the spring. John smiled a bit as he thought of the young and lively Esther Prynne. His smile turned wistful as he remembered her smile, her energy, her slim and graceful body. She was about 5 feet 4 inches tall, but seemed taller because of her liveliness. Her blonde hair was long, almost reaching her shoulders. Her blue eyes sparkled with happiness whenever he appeared. Damn, he thought to himself. They had loved each other so much. His somber mood returned as he thought back to that New Year's Eve party thrown by her law firm, just weeks after he had given her the engagement ring. He had never felt comfortable with her colleagues. He always sensed they looked down on him a bit, as if his job wasn't good enough. Maybe his own dislike for them wasn't hidden well, which always upset Esther. She kept reminding him that it was her chosen career, and he had to accept it. He knew she was right, so he tried his best to get along with them until that party. By about 11 p.m., everyone was pretty drunk. Esther's company had booked a bunch of hotel rooms, so no one worried about driving home. People had their spouses there, and most singles had dates. Folks were staggering around, spilling drinks. It looked like an old, wild party scene. The only sober ones were a few senior partners who looked upset at how drunk everyone was. They sat at a far table with their wives, trying to ignore the craziness. John noticed that Art Doyle, the senior partner, seemed especially upset. Ironically, Art was one of the few at the firm that John liked and respected. Art always showed respect for John's work and made a point to chat with him at company events. John saw Art look around with a grim face and knew there would be some serious talking to do later in the week. That thought made John smile a bit. Despite the humor, John felt uneasy. He always avoided gatherings where people got very drunk. He made sure never to drink too much, never losing control. He vowed not to turn into his father, who had been a drunk and died in a car crash. His mother had to take care of them both after his father left them with nothing. John grew up in a tough part of the city and saw the harsh realities of poverty and a broken education system. Deep down, he knew that it was not entirely the school's fault. School wasn't important to the parents of the troublemakers. John remembered this as he thought about his past. He used to skip school a lot. His grades were bad because he didn't care. His mom was always busy and didn't have time for him. So he hung out with a gang until his mom married Tim Murphy. Tim was a policeman and everything changed for John. Tim showed John that his gang life would lead to misery. John wasn't dumb, so he quickly changed. In just a few months, he started focusing on his schoolwork and actually enjoying it. He also decided he would never let alcohol take over his life like his father did. This is why John felt uncomfortable at the party. Everyone was drunk, even his fiancée Esther, who hardly ever drank. She teased him for being so serious and told him to relax. Esther was clearly tipsy, and John tried to tell her it was time to leave. She got annoyed, telling him it wasn't even midnight yet, and she wanted to welcome the new year. John waited and kept away from the oysters. As midnight approached, he looked for Esther. He found her kissing James Moriarty, a young lawyer. It wasn't just a quick kiss. They were kissing deeply and very evidently. John, pale and shaking, walked over and pulled Esther away. Later that evening, John angrily asked Esther what she was thinking. Didn't she remember she was engaged? Moriarty made a mistake by pushing John. In seconds, Moriarty was on the floor with John standing over him. Esther was red-faced and angry. She slapped John hard, making everyone around them go silent. Shocked but calm, John took Esther's left hand and removed the engagement ring. He dropped it to the floor and crushed it under his heel. Without another word, he left the party. Outside, John walked to his car, breathing slowly to calm down. He was shaking with anger and feeling embarrassed. He knew he had to get back to the apartment, pack his things, and leave as fast as possible. Esther had gone too far, and he couldn't forgive her just because she was drunk. When John got home, he quickly packed 2 suitcases. He looked around and felt sad. Was this all he had from their life together? 2 suitcases and a duffel bag of personal stuff. This was the end, he thought. He couldn't trust Esther anymore. John found a room at a Holiday Inn near the university. He planned to get a place at the faculty residence the next day. He knew he needed time away from Esther to think about everything. The next few days were busy with the start of the new term. John ignored messages and calls from Esther. He wasn't ready to see or talk to her. His face still stung from her slap, and he missed her a lot. He wondered if he was overreacting to a drunken mistake, but doubted it. 2 weeks passed since the party and since John moved out. He got a call from Mr. Doyle, inviting him to lunch at his club. John tried to decline, but Mr. Doyle insisted, so he went, unsure of what to expect. Entering the bright dining room, John saw Doyle sitting by the windows in a cozy corner. He walked over, and Doyle stood up with a smile. "Hello, John. Thanks for coming," he greeted, reaching out his hand. John smiled back and shook his hand. "Thanks, Mr. Doyle. Nice to see you again," he replied, though not too excitedly. Doyle smiled kindly. "John, please call me Art. I've asked you to before. I hope you see me as a friend." "Of course, Art. I have a lot of respect for you. I've always appreciated how kind you've been to me," John replied as they sat down. They made small talk while enjoying a light lunch. As the table was cleared and coffee arrived, Art leaned back, looking fondly at John. "John, you probably know why I asked you to lunch today. Beyond wanting to spend time with you, there's something important we need to talk about." John sighed and nodded. He knew this was coming and in truth was somewhat relieved. Perhaps there was hope for repairing things and Art could be the one to help. Art smiled, seeing John's readiness. "John, first, I need to apologize on behalf of the firm. We let things get out of hand. The office party wasn't meant to become such a mess. The staff got a stern talk when they came back to work. Also, Moriarty has been moved to another city. It was clear his behavior wasn't a secret and now he's no longer around. I would have fired him, but this was simpler." John raised his eyebrows. His behavior wasn't a one-time thing, he thought. He wondered what else Esther didn't tell him. Art, seeing his worry, frowned slightly. "John, I know what you're thinking. Please know that I looked into it and you don't need to worry. Nothing more happened than what you know. I've talked to Esther several times this week and she's really upset." She's not herself, and the firm needs her well. Besides, you know I care about you both and don't want this to ruin a good relationship. John, you love her, and it's clear she loves you. You need to talk to her and fix this. Don't let one mistake destroy what you both want." John nodded. He knew Art was right. "I know. I think I'm calm enough now to talk to Esther. I'll call her and set up a meeting. It's time." Art grinned widely. "No need, John. Esther is expecting you at the apartment for dinner tonight. Don't get mad. I know you, John. You're smart and reasonable. I knew you'd see my point." John smiled wryly. "All right, Art. Tell her I'll be there, but not for dinner. I'll come around 8 so we can talk over coffee." "Thanks, Art. You're a good friend." I needed a push. That evening, John and Esther did talk. Their conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. At first, Esther was nervous, starting and stopping, looking at her coffee cup. John stayed calm, waiting for her to speak first. He knew that to move forward, they needed to be honest about what happened and clear about their expectations. But he wasn't going to make this easy. He felt Esther needed to take the first step to fix things. Esther finally looked up at John, tears in her eyes. "John, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I kissed him. I don't know why I did it at all. I guess I had too much to drink. I'm ashamed of myself and hope you can forgive me." She spoke quickly like she'd rehearsed it. John stayed calm, watching the clearly upset woman. He sighed. "I understand, but understanding doesn't make it hurt less. You sided with him, not me. Do you know how that felt? The embarrassment? If this is what I can expect, I don't know if we should continue." Esther went pale and shook her head. "No, John, please. I do love you. Don't let a stupid moment ruin what we have." "Look, Esther," John replied softly. "I don't want to sound harsh or drag this out, but we need to be clear about what we expect from each other. If we plan to marry, we must agree on what honor, love, and faithfulness mean." In the end, Esther apologized again and promised not to drink too much ever again. While John wondered what she meant by too much, he also apologized for losing his temper, though he felt his reaction was understandable. Their talk covered what being faithful meant to them, along with loyalty and trust. John moved back to the apartment the next day. After a few days, things seemed to go back to normal. However, John never bought an engagement ring again, and Esther never asked for one. They married in the spring as planned. Their marriage was a good one. They loved each other. That love faced a test when they found out a few years later that John couldn't have children. John got tested and found out his few sperm were not strong. They talked about other ways to have a family, but decided it would be just the two of them. It didn't seem to upset Esther as much as John thought it would. He knew she had cried quietly a few nights before bed, and he held her close. She had accepted it. It was amazing. She found comfort in her job and her relationship with John. John blinked and looked around, feeling embarrassed for daydreaming so long. He felt some relief when he saw only a few minutes had passed. While thinking about the past, he noticed his drink was empty and thought for a few seconds about getting another. He decided and signaled to Chester. Soon, a new drink was in front of him. John remembered Art Doyle fondly and felt sad about Art's recent death. This sadness stayed at the edge of his mind. A.C. Doyle and Lila Stride, one of the younger partners, were the only friends John had made at the law firm. Lila joined about 10 years ago and quickly became friends with John, starting at a company event. She knew John was a university professor and was very impressed. Lila had always wanted to teach. John was glad he was still in good health. Thoughts of his wife came to his mind again, making him frown. Their 20th anniversary was coming up, but he felt uneasy about their relationship, which should have been a happy thought. He couldn't understand what was happening to them. After almost 20 years of love, things had gone downhill. It was so slow that he hadn't noticed until now. The lack of affection, the indifference, even a little disrespect were becoming clear. The small arguments and lack of physical touch were now too common. Looking back over the past few months, John realized real problems had crept into their marriage. He didn't know how to talk to Esther about it or what to do to fix things. John knew why he was afraid to bring it up. Esther's words could be sharp, and he didn't want another bitter fight with her. He thought, "Is it really so bad that I can't even talk to her?" He wondered. John was startled by a soft voice at his ear. "Hey, buddy, buy a girl a drink." He turned and saw Irene at his side, which made him smile. "Irene," he said, "what are you doing here? You're the last person I expected to see." "I stop by every few weeks, John, for old time's sake. Order a gin and tonic for me. I'll be right back," she said as she hurried to the restrooms. John smiled fondly after her. Dr. Irene Adler, a striking beauty in her late 30s, was an attractive woman. Her dark, shoulder-length hair and flashing dark brown eyes made her stand out. She was now the assistant chair of the Drama and Performing Arts Department, quite an achievement for the first in her family to go to and graduate from university. She and John had been friends since their graduate days. He and Esther had stood by her through 2 divorces and many failed relationships. John considered Irene his closest friend and valued that relationship. She came back and sat on a stool next to him. Picking up her drink, she said, "Okay, Johnny, what's wrong?" "Why do you think something's wrong? And what's that nonsense about you stopping here?" "I'm sure you rarely come here," John replied. Irene laughed and took a sip. "Okay, Sherlock, I saw your car outside as I was driving by and wondered why you were here. So I decided to stop and see if it was really you. Happy now?" John looked at her with real affection. There was no desire in that look. He truly valued Irene as a friend and trusted her completely. That's why he spilled his frustrations and confusion about his marriage to her so easily. She listened as John talked about what had gone wrong in his marriage. She sensed the anger behind his words and put her hand on his arm, trying to calm him down. John finally paused. He felt drained, but a bit relieved. He needed this moment of sharing his pain. And who better to share it with than his closest friend? Irene sat quietly, feeling very sad as she listened to her friend's pain. She had no idea how much John had been hurting. For a long time, John had hidden his feelings well, so Irene was surprised to learn about the fight between her good friends. She didn't have an answer for him, but she couldn't believe that John and Esther's love was so weak. Something else had to be happening. "John," Irene interrupted, "try to look at this clearly. I know it's hard right now, but you're talking about many small things. There has to be a reason why things are so bad. What you're describing are the signs, not the cause. Something must have caused this. Did you do anything to really upset Esther? Has she done anything to upset you? I can't believe you two just stopped caring about each other for no reason." "There has to be a reason," Irene finished. John sat there shaking his head. "I don't know, Irene. I just don't know. I can't think of any one thing that's happened over the past few months. It's true, we seem to have just drifted into this mess and I don't know how to fix it." "How about talking to her, John? Just sit down and talk to her," Irene said softly. We've tried having calm talks, but they always turn into fights. She says I'm too paranoid and then I lose my temper." "It's not working, Irene, it's just not working," John replied, his voice trailing off. That same afternoon, in another part of town, Dr. John Watson's wife, Esther Watson, was leaning back in her office chair, staring at the tall, blonde man sitting across from her. She was openly examining him, with a slight smile on her face. Esther knew what Jim Moriarty wanted. He had been trying to charm her for months, but she had always laughed it off. "Damn," she thought. "He still looks good. He almost makes me excited just looking at him. But that's as far as it goes. He's not worth risking my marriage, not that my marriage is great right now." The thought made her smile turn bitter. "Jim," she said, "it's been over half a year since you came back and you haven't changed at all. You're still chasing women. Why not get married again? Then you won't have to hunt so much." Jim laughed. "I'm just being friendly. Why get so defensive? You're a beautiful woman and any man would love to be with you. Your husband is a fool. He cares more about his books than you, and you know I'm right. You want me. I see it in your eyes. And it will happen, Esther. It will." Esther bit her lip and looked away. Jim's words hit closer to home than he knew. She was aware of the distance between her and John. They seemed to be growing apart, and his harsh remarks about her job left a bad taste. She had to admit she responded in kind, mocking his profession. Years ago, these comments were jokes without any harm. But now, they just hurt. Maybe I should have told John about Jim coming back, she wondered. I was just scared of his reaction. I hope not telling him wasn't a mistake. Esther turned her thoughts back to Jim. "Look, Jim, let's not go there. My home life is off limits. Leave it alone." Jim just smiled. "All right." Just remember, I'm always here for you. You know you have a friend here." "Yeah, a real friend," Esther replied with a frown. "I'm not stupid, Jim. I know what you want. Stay away from me and stop fooling around at work. Now let's focus on finishing the Simmons contract." Jim laughed as he stood up, leaned over, and lightly brushed her lips before she could react. Then he walked out, humming to himself. Esther sat still for a moment, breathing heavily, feeling ashamed by how much his small gesture affected her. She touched her lips, feeling a thrill, aware of how long it had been since her husband had shown her any affection. "Where is all this flirting with Jim going to lead?" she wondered. "Will I really give in and have an affair?" Shaking her head, she dismissed those thoughts quickly. Esther's phone rang, and she answered it with impatience, recognizing Stan Hopkins' voice, one of the senior partners. "You're finishing the Simmons contract, right?" he asked. "Yes, Stan," she replied. "It's been taking up our time for months now. Why, is there a problem?" "Not really, but it looks like you'll have to fly up to see him on Monday. He can't come down as planned, and he wants it all done soon." "Damn it, Stan," Esther protested. "It's Friday now. We'll have to work tomorrow to finish. We'll be cutting it close, and I've only had Jim helping me on this." I know, Stan sighed. "I'll get you more help tomorrow, but we'll probably have to work late, and you need to get some rest, too. Let's come in early tomorrow. You and Jim can finish it by the end of the day. I'll tell him right after this call." Esther replied, not very enthusiastically, and ended the call. She sat for a moment, worried. This would probably cause another argument with John. He had been upset about her long work hours, and she knew she was putting her job ahead of their marriage. Esther felt uneasy and hoped this wouldn't lead to a big fight. She decided to talk to John. He would understand once this project was done. They could then spend more time together and maybe go on a long-awaited vacation. She realized she had been irritable with him lately, snapping at him for no real reason. She promised herself that things would change once the project was over. James Moriarty leaned back in his chair with a bitter smile. He knew Esther was stressed and thought she might eventually turn to him. He had never forgotten that New Year's Eve fight with her husband. Moriarty had been insulted, moved to a different job, and his career had suffered. But he was back now and wanted revenge. He felt the best way to hurt Dr. John Watson was by ruining his marriage with Esther. He was confident he could do it. The weather had cooled down and there was a chill in the air. Luckily, it had stopped raining. John was eager to get home. When he drove into the driveway, he saw the house was dark. "Damn," he muttered. It seemed like Esther was having another late night at work. His lips tightened in annoyance. But then a car pulled up next to his. It was Esther. He hid his surprise as he got out of his car and waited by the door. "Hi, sweetie," she greeted cheerfully. "Great, we made it home at the same time. How about we freshen up and I'll treat you to dinner? Let's go somewhere nice tonight." "Okay, honey," John replied, but he felt suspicious. Esther was acting too cheerful, almost giddy. Something was off. People don't change from being distant to overly affectionate overnight. He decided to play along and see what she had in mind. Despite his doubts, John and Esther had a pleasant dinner. They talked warmly, and John felt hopeful. Maybe they could fix their problems and remember why they fell in love and got married. That evening, John really looked at Esther for the first time in a while. He felt a bit guilty. She was still a beautiful woman, even in her 40s, and she still had a certain charm that attracted him. Maybe he was also to blame for their issues. Maybe he hadn't given her the attention she deserved. Maybe he was too focused on his job, leaving no time for their marriage. John decided he would make more effort, as long as Esther did too. He knew that both of them had a part in the problems, but he was willing to try harder. Esther noticed that John was starting to relax and open up. She also saw him looking at her with desire in his eyes. This filled her with affection for her husband, and she felt lucky to have him. She promised herself to work harder on their relationship. She hoped to get through this last big work project soon so she could focus fully on her marriage. She cuddled into John's arm on the way home. Once home, they parked in the garage and entered the warm living room where John had started a fire. They poured glasses of wine and soft music played on the stereo. Esther knew she had to tell John she needed to go to work again tomorrow and then travel out of town on Monday. She worried about how he would react and bit her lip, trying to find a way to break the news gently. She thought about waiting until tomorrow to tell him, but she knew he would be even more upset if she waited until the last minute. She braced herself. She knew this wouldn't be easy. "Honey, I have good news," she began. "This whole project is almost finished, and then we can go back to a normal life. I know it's been hard for both of us, but it'll be done in just a few more days. I have to go into work tomorrow to finish the final draft, then we'll travel on Monday to meet with the client." "I don't need to hear any more, Esther," John snapped, cutting her off. "It's clear how important your career is to you. It's obvious it's more important than our marriage. At least, more important than your marriage to me. You don't have to explain. It's the same old story. I've heard it all before. I've been hearing it for years." John turned to leave the room, but before going up the stairs, he stopped and looked at her. She sat there with tears in her eyes. "Think, Essie. Think about what you really want. Think about it this weekend. I'll do the same in the coming days." John turned off the light, went up the stairs, and entered the guest room. He took off his clothes, got into bed, and tried to sleep. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. Esther woke up early. She took a quick shower, put on a skirt and a sweater, and tied her hair into a ponytail. She didn't eat breakfast, grabbed her briefcase, and left the house quickly. She did not want to see her husband. She was still mad about his mean words last night. She wondered how long they could keep going like this if they did not change. But she pushed those thoughts away. Right now, she needed to focus on finishing her work project. The problems with her marriage would have to wait. John woke up late long after Esther had left. He felt tired and worn out. He had barely slept and was filled with worry and anger. He went through his morning routine, shower, shave, and so on. Finally, he went downstairs and made a pot of coffee. He noticed that the kitchen was untouched. Esther hadn't even made any coffee. He felt a pang of guilt. John sat at the table with his head in his hands, the coffee untouched in front of him. His head hurt, and the aspirin hadn't kicked in yet. His anger had cooled, and now he felt bad for how he acted. John knew that yelling at his wife was wrong. He had been grumpy and rude for months, and he didn't know why. He realized that she also seemed impatient with him, which led to more fights. John liked to think things through. He thought about the last few months, trying to figure out why they kept fighting. He couldn't find any single reason. It seemed like out of nowhere, they went from a loving couple to enemies. What has happened? He wondered. John resolved to fight for his marriage. He knew that he loved Esther and would do whatever it took to fix things. He promised himself to control his temper and not act out. He thought about the argument the night before and smiled a little. Despite everything, he still loved his wife. He realized he had overreacted to Esther's news about work and the upcoming trip. He regretted losing his temper now. John looked at the clock. It was almost noon. He suddenly had an idea. He would surprise Esther at work and invite her to lunch. He needed to show her that he was willing to change and be more supportive. He nodded to himself. That's a good plan, he thought. As he drove to Esther's office, John hummed to himself. Then he heard a thunk-thunk. He had a flat tire. Sighing, he pulled into a diner's parking lot a few blocks away. Standing by his car, John called for roadside assistance. They said it would take about 30 minutes to an hour. He decided to have a quick bite at the diner while he waited. He walked into the diner and was heading to a booth when he heard someone call his name. He looked around and saw Lila Stride, a senior partner at Esther's law firm, sitting alone. She waved him over. "John, what a nice surprise. Please join me. I haven't even ordered yet," Lila said. John smiled and sat down. "Nice to see you, Lila. What brings you here on a Saturday? Isn't Emily upset that you're working so much?" "My wife is out of town, visiting a friend for the weekend. I went to the office to get a file and stopped here for a bite. I'm terrible in the kitchen," Lila said with a laugh. "But what about you, John? Do you come here often?" "No," John replied. "I was on my way to see if Esther wanted to have lunch, but I got a flat tire. Now I'm waiting for help." "Well, at least you tried," Lila said. "The project Esther and Jim are working on should be finished soon. We can all celebrate when they get back." "Jim?" John asked, confused. "I don't remember Esther mentioning him." "Jim Moriarty," Lila explained. "He's been here for about 6 months. I'm surprised Esther hasn't mentioned him. They've been working together on this project for a while now." At that moment, a waitress came by to refill their coffee cups. John felt a cold sweat break out. John felt his throat tighten and his stomach turn into a knot. A red haze clouded his vision, and it took a great effort to control himself and keep going. I guess I haven't been paying attention, Lee. It almost feels like Esther and I live in two different worlds. Sometimes he forced a smile. Luckily, Lee didn't notice that John's smile never reached his eyes. Yeah, I guess we're all a bit guilty of that. Sometimes I have to force myself to listen to what Emily says. Lee laughed. John had to use all his willpower to stay in the booth, eat his tuna salad sandwich, sip his iced tea, and keep the small talk going with Lee. His mind was screaming for his attention, but he pushed down his anger and did his best to look calm. His heart was pounding in his ears, and sweat ran down from his armpits. Finally, he saw the auto service truck pull into the lot, and he quickly made an excuse and left. John drove home on autopilot. When he finally looked up and saw his garage, he realized he had no memory of the drive. The whole trip from the diner to his house was a blur. He took a long breath, got out of the car, and stumbled into the house. His thoughts were a mess, and he felt empty and lost. He knew he had to sit down and think it through, but he couldn't focus. He couldn't calm his mind. He couldn't even start to figure out why. "Esther is cheating on you, you fool!" his mind screamed at him. "She's cheating on you, you idiot! She's cheating right under your nose! And you didn't even notice." "No, no!" John screamed out loud, his voice echoing off the walls. "That's not true! That's not true! Shut up!" He stood still, shaking, trying to regain control. The pain he felt was deep, and tears kept coming to his eyes. He kept wiping them away. He walked slowly to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a small glass of scotch, adding water to it. Looking at the drink in his hand, he hesitated, then poured it into the sink. He knew that wasn't the answer. He wasn't his father. He went to the bathroom, washed his face, and searched the medicine cabinet for the small bottle of low-dose Xanax that Esther used to help her sleep. He paused for a moment, looking at the pills in his hand, then shook his head and put the bottle back. His lips twisted into a bitter smile, and he almost laughed at what he had considered doing. He felt a bit calmer as the shock of the sudden discovery wore off and his mind began to work again, though still a bit erratically. So Jim Moriarty is back, he thought. He's back, and she never told me. No wonder our marriage has been falling apart these last few months. It's amazing she managed to juggle both her marriage and her lover. John reflected. Now the question is, what am I going to do about this? There was little doubt in his mind that she'd been with him for months now, and they were even going away together on business. He laughed bitterly. No wonder she hasn't been interested in me. She's been getting enough from him. John knew he couldn't tolerate his wife's cheating. There was no way he could stay married to her. He would have to do something. He would have to file for divorce. The word hit him hard. Divorce. Such an ugly word. But there it was. He briefly thought about counseling, but knew it was too late. Maybe before she started cheating, they could have done it. But not now. As John sat thinking about his bleak future, the sorrow inside him began to be replaced by a cold calm that cleared his mind. He felt a bitterness at his wife's betrayal. No more tears, no more feeling sorry for himself. It was time to take action. The deep lines of anguish on his face faded, replaced with a grim resolve. The boy who had once roamed the tough city streets took control. He wouldn't be fooled by anyone. Despite what he believed was clear evidence of Esther's cheating, John still had a small doubt. He knew he needed solid proof before he acted. He needed hard evidence of his wife's affair. Then there would be no doubt. A grim smile crossed his lips. "There's a price to pay for cheating, sweetheart. A very high price," he muttered under his breath as he picked up the phone, not noticing the tears streaming down his cheeks. "Stan," Hopkins' voice echoed through the nearly empty office. "It's almost 3 o'clock and I have to leave. Are you guys almost finished?" "A couple more hours, Stan. Jim is wrapping up the first part of the final draft, and I'm nearly done here." "Okay. Remember your plane leaves at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. Your tickets are at the counter. Get a good night's sleep and be ready for that meeting with Simmons. It should be routine unless they come up with something else to worry us about. Say goodbye to Jim for me. See you all when you get back," Stan Hopkins said as he left. Leaving tomorrow evening is going to cause another fight with John, she thought to herself, wondering how they could ever get past this. Could they ever find their way back to the love they once had? Esther felt worried again. She realized that spending a couple of nights alone in a hotel with Jim, even in different rooms and maybe on different floors, might be trouble if John found out. She wondered if she had made a big mistake by not telling her husband that Jim was back at work. She shook her head impatiently. She hadn't done anything wrong and didn't plan to. But why did she feel so anxious? John? "Come in, give me your jacket," Irene said when she saw John at her door. "Now tell me what's going on. You didn't sound like yourself on the phone. Do you want a drink or something?" "Nothing, Irene," John replied. "Thanks for letting me come over on such short notice. I really need to talk to you." Irene saw his tired face and red eyes. She knew something happened, but would let John explain. Something was really wrong. Her heart went out to him. "Okay, John, at least sit down." John moved into the cozy living room. The afternoon sun lit the room, making it feel warm and homely. If he wasn't so upset, he would have noticed how inviting Irene's home was. He sat in one of the comfy chairs and crossed his legs, looking at her. He smiled weakly, feeling a rush of affection for his good friend. "Irene, I'm really sorry for bringing my problems to you. It seems you're the lucky one who has to hear them," John joked, trying to laugh. Irene sat, waiting. Her body language showed she was ready to listen. John began to tell her his fears that Esther was having an affair. "It all makes sense now, Irene. Why our marriage has been getting worse these past few months. Her cold attitude, lack of affection, and disrespect. I don't even remember the last time we truly kissed." John's voice got louder, and he paused to calm down. Tears came to his eyes. "I don't even remember the last time we kissed. Can you believe that?" Irene felt pain for him and Esther. Even with the information John gave her, she found it hard to believe Esther would cheat. She knew how much Esther loved him. "John," Irene said gently, "listen, please. I know that finding out about Jim's return has upset you, but think about this. Maybe she didn't tell you because she knew you would get angry. Maybe she didn't want to upset you. Couldn't that be true?" John just shook his head. "I've thought of that, Irene. I've tried to believe that, but it doesn't match the facts. His return matches the start of our problems. That can't be just a coincidence. Whenever she said she had to work late or go in on a Saturday, I never doubted her. I knew her project was tough, and I was understanding. But the late nights, weekends, and sudden absences started to hurt our marriage. We fought about it, and I warned her she was putting her job ahead of us. She called me paranoid and tried to calm me down, saying it would soon be over and we'd be back to normal." John paused and then smiled bitterly. "Let's be honest, Irene. Esther is with Jim, and there's no way I can accept that. My marriage is over. It's broken. All I need now is proof before I start divorce proceedings." Irene gasped and covered her mouth. "Divorce? Wait, John, aren't you jumping to conclusions? All you have are suspicions. Yes, it doesn't look good, but don't rush. You need to get to the bottom of this. Talk to her. You know she can't lie to you." "Damn it, Irene. She's been lying to me for months. She's gotten good at it. Look, Irene, you're into drama and stagecraft. Can you make me up so I can't be recognized? I'm going to follow her and Jim and get the proof I need." Irene laughed, releasing some tension. "John, what? You're going to be James Bond? Forget makeup. You'll look silly. And makeup won't last for days. But you might be right about flying out and just checking things out. You might find you're totally wrong. If you want to go unnoticed, just change a few things. You never wear a hat, so get a ball cap. Buy some glasses from the dollar store, and instead of a suit, wear a denim jacket and jeans, something no one has seen you in. Those changes will make you disappear, trust me." John nodded. "Good idea, I'll do just that. They don't expect to see me there, so I doubt they'll spot me. Esther is leaving Monday morning. I'll get a ticket for the flight after hers. At least I'll be doing something, not just sitting around imagining her with that jerk." Irene grimaced. It felt strange to be in this position. John and Esther had often comforted her when her relationships didn't work out. But now, things were different. Irene had never thought she would be in this situation. She walked with John to the door, hugging him. She asked him to keep her updated. John promised he would, then slowly went to his car and drove away. Irene stood in the doorway for a moment, deep in thought. She felt sorry for her friend, and a new thought came to her mind. She whispered to herself, "John is planning to leave Esther. He will be free. Irene quickly shook her head. "No, stop it, you fool," she scolded herself. "You are their friend, not someone trying to take advantage." But the thought lingered. The idea was planted, and it would come back again. "John, John," Esther shouted as she walked inside. Her husband had just come in from the back deck and heard her call his name. He stood there, noticing how upset she seemed. "Okay, Esther, calm down. I'm here. What's wrong?" Esther took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She feared John might get angry when she told him she would be leaving the next evening instead of Monday morning. "John, please don't be mad, and let's not fight again." She took a deep breath and said, "I'm leaving Sunday night instead of Monday. This project will be over once I get the final sign-off. No more crazy hours. Things can go back to normal. I know we have had problems, but let me finish this, and I promise things will get better." Esther waited, clenching her hands. She expected John to get angry, like always, but John just stood there, holding back his anger. "Okay, Esther, I get it. No shouting, no harsh words. I understand. Go do what you need to do. We'll talk when you get back. We have a lot to discuss." John then turned and left the house, got into his car and drove away. He couldn't stand being near her. He didn't want to be in the same house. Esther watched him leave, surprised. John had never walked away in anger before. That's when Esther knew their marriage was in deep trouble. She wondered if they could ever fix it. Underneath her worry and fear, she felt a bit of anger. Why couldn't he understand her job and support her more? John came back late that night. He had parked by the river and walked for miles. He returned to his car, tired in both body and mind. As he drove home, he couldn't stop thinking about his marriage troubles. He told himself, "What's the use of worrying? This needs to end. Quit the nonsense and just get it over with." He got home to a dark, quiet house. It was past midnight. John quietly went upstairs to the guest room, too tired to change his clothes. He kicked off his shoes, lay on the bed, and despite his troubled thoughts, fell into a deep sleep. The next day was tense in the Watson household. John and Esther avoided each other. When the taxi arrived in the afternoon, Esther picked up her briefcase and suitcase and left without saying a word to John. John watched from the window as she got into the cab and drove away. He started to have second thoughts about his plans for the next day. Did it matter anymore? Esther leaving felt like the end of their relationship. He thought, does it matter if she is going to meet someone else? No, I need proof. I need hard evidence. I can't have any doubts. John checked into a hotel the following morning, dressed differently to avoid being recognized. He wore a Phillies baseball cap, silly glasses, a plaid shirt, jeans, and a denim jacket. He even surprised himself with how different he looked and felt confident he wouldn't be noticed. It was after 11 a.m., and he knew Esther would be out. He planned to stay in the lobby, in a hidden spot where he could see the elevators but wouldn't be easily seen. From the check-in desk, John headed to his room but paused when he saw a flower shop. He went in, picked up a business card, and then stepped out into a small corner. He called the flower shop and ordered a dozen roses to be delivered to Esther's room within the next hour. John went back to the lobby and waited. Soon he saw a bellman carrying a vase of red roses and followed him to the elevator. The bellman, whose name tag read Bill, pushed the button for the 12th floor. Bill looked at John, who just nodded and smiled. They both got off on the 12th floor. Bill turned left while John slowed down, watching him go. John saw Bill knock on a door, wait a bit, and then use a key to enter room 1212. John smiled, turned, and quickly headed to the stairs. He didn't want Bill to see him. On the 11th floor, he walked to the elevators, saw one going down, waited, and then pressed the button. He got off on the 9th floor, where his room was. At 4 o'clock, John was seated in the lobby. He had a newspaper on his lap, but he wasn't really reading it. His eyes kept drifting to the clock on the wall, and time seemed to move very slowly. At 6:33, he saw Esther walk into the lobby. She was with a tall, thin, blonde man who John recognized as James Moriarty, even though it had been years since they last met. They both looked tense, not happy. It seemed things hadn't gone well in their meeting. They weren't talking much. John saw Moriarty take Esther's elbow, trying to lead her to the dining room, but she pulled away, shook her head, and headed to the elevators. Moriarty shrugged and followed her. John watched the elevator lights, which stopped at the 8th floor before going up to the 12th. He realized he had been holding his breath and let it out in a loud sigh. John went to the hotel coffee shop and quickly ate a sandwich and drank iced tea. He didn't want to be away for too long. Soon he was back in his chair with the newspaper, pretending to read. He stayed there until a little after 11. Then he went to his room. His suitcase was still on the bed. Deep in thought, he unpacked, washed up, and brushed his teeth. Maybe Esther was right, he thought. Maybe he was being paranoid. They didn't look like they were having an affair. They didn't touch, didn't smile softly. Their actions seemed professional. John shook his head. Was he being foolish? He got undressed, put on pajamas, and got into bed. But he couldn't sleep. He needed to think. He needed to figure out what was really happening. Could he have been wrong? John knew he needed to set his feelings aside and think clearly, something he should have done months ago. But being in love and thinking your partner is being unfaithful makes it hard to think straight. John's thoughts were jumbled. He knew he had to finish this undercover mission, go home and talk to Esther. He had to tell her his worries and fears without letting it turn into another argument. Every time they tried to talk about their problems, they ended up fighting. Maybe it was his fault too. But this time, they needed to either solve their problems or agree it was over. John felt a sudden emptiness. Life without Esther would be a pale imitation of what he had. He loved her and always had, but knew that love could turn bitter without care. John sighed, still confused about the future. He turned over and, despite himself, fell into a troubled sleep. He woke late the next morning feeling like he hadn't slept much. His head hurt, and there was a bad taste in his mouth. He quickly showered and brushed his teeth. He dressed and went down to the coffee shop. He wasn't very hungry. He had toast and coffee and thought about his options. He realized he had to consider that Esther's affair might just be his imagination. He felt ashamed. Jumping to conclusions wasn't like him. He needed to be objective and consider that his doubts might be baseless. He decided to stay for the second night he had reserved. He would watch the lobby again, but was starting to think he wouldn't see anything suspicious. That evening, John was back in his chair in the lobby. He had another newspaper but wasn't reading it. He kept looking at the clock. It was past 7 o'clock and he was getting worried again. At 7:14, he felt a bit of relief when he saw Esther enter the lobby. But his relief didn't last long. Esther and Moriarty were laughing and holding each other. Moriarty had his arm around her, whispering in her ear. John's heart sank as he saw the joy in her eyes and the flush on her cheeks. They went into the dining room and sat down out of his sight. Esther was thrilled. They had finally convinced Simone to sign the contract. After many months of hard work and long hours, she felt like all their efforts had finally paid off. She believed this success could get her a partnership in the firm. She felt happy and looked at her dining partner, Jim, with fondness. Even though Jim had a bit of a reputation with the ladies, he was a smart lawyer and worked very hard. He would share in the success of this project. She would make sure he got the credit he deserved. "Essie," Jim said excitedly, "I can't believe it's finally over. All those months we spent working on it, it almost makes me dizzy." He called the waiter and ordered a bottle of wine. Esther almost wanted to say no, but then she shrugged. Why not, she thought. We deserve it. We worked so hard for this moment. They ate their dinner slowly, enjoying every bite. They soon finished the bottle of wine. They chatted easily, both feeling relaxed and happy about their success. Esther glanced at her watch. It was almost 9 p.m. "Okay, Jim, it's getting late and we have a flight to catch tomorrow. Time to call it a night," she said, her voice a bit slurred. "Oh, come on, Essie. It's not that late. Let's not end the night yet. How about we go to the lounge and relax a bit more?" Jim pleaded. "We're both on a high from today. We need to chill out. Just a couple more drinks. The night is still young, come on." Esther paused and then laughed at the hopeful look on Jim's face. "Why not?" she thought. "It really is early. Okay, Jim, let me go up to my room and change out of this suit. I'll be down in a bit, but just for one drink. That's it." Jim watched eagerly as Esther walked to the elevators. He breathed a sigh of relief, seeing her enter alone. He almost went back to his room but decided to go to the lounge for a drink instead. He needed something to relax him after seeing Esther and Moriarty at the hotel together. John found a seat at the end of the bar and ordered a scotch and water. He saw Moriarty sitting in a corner booth and wondered why he sat there. John turned away quickly, not wanting to be noticed. From where he sat, the mirror behind the bar gave him a good view of that part of the lounge. He could watch without being seen. John slowly sipped his drink, feeling his tension ease. He started to think maybe his worries were for nothing and planned out an apology to Esther that she couldn't refuse. His eyes kept drifting to the mirror. He still saw Moriarty in the booth, nursing the one drink he had ordered. The lounge wasn't very crowded. Looking at his watch, John saw it was almost 9:30 p.m. Just as he was about to leave, his stomach tightened and his throat clenched. Esther walked into the lounge wearing a simple white blouse, a tight black skirt, and a string of pearls around her neck. John recognized those pearls. He had given them to her for her 40th birthday. Esther saw Moriarty in the booth and walked over, a bit unsteady. Moriarty stood up, took her hand, and showed her to the booth. Then he slid in beside her. John was too far away to hear their conversation, but he could see it all in the mirror. The way they were together spoke volumes. John saw Moriarty wave to the bar girl and order drinks. He then gave her some money with a smile. The drinks came, and the two of them sipped and talked happily. John kept watching in the mirror, seeing his wife laugh and glow, looking so happy. Moriarty touched her hand and arm as he spoke softly to her. John felt a deep anger building inside him. There was no doubt in his mind anymore. He sat there quietly, his thoughts clear. He saw his wife acting all lovesick over that man and knew their marriage was over. But John decided he wouldn't just give up quietly. He sat there, a grim smile on his face, watching the two in the booth. Esther giggled at something Moriarty whispered to her. She giggled again, feeling the effects of the wine and the drinks. She didn't even object when Moriarty ordered another round. Esther felt great, on top of the world. Her hard work had paid off, so why not celebrate a bit? She quickly drank the next glass, not noticing Moriarty signaling for more. She felt warm and happy. She then felt Moriarty's lips on hers. She tried to push him away, but her hands betrayed her. Instead of pushing, they clutched his shirt, pulling him closer. Simplified version. Esther felt a bit of clarity and pulled away. No, she gasped. I can't, I'm married, she stammered. But Moriarty ignored her weak protests, kissing her neck gently. Esther felt desire again. It was clear what he wanted. Moriarty took advantage, moving his hand to touch her. Esther rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, Please, Jim, we shouldn't. It's wrong. But she didn't try to stop him. She lifted her head and kissed him. The alcohol made everything fuzzy and exciting. Suddenly, a familiar voice broke the moment. I see you don't mind if I join, said John, slipping into the seat across from them. He placed a newspaper and some clothes on the table. Esther, confused, realized her husband was sitting there. Her hand went to her mouth, and her face turned pale. Moriarty, struggling to fix his pants, tried to leave but stopped when John snarled, Move and I'll rip your face off. Moriarty stayed seated, looking scared. He remembered his first run-in with Esther's husband. Esther felt a chill. The excitement disappeared. John's sudden appearance felt like cold water thrown on her. She saw the anger in his eyes. Tell me I'm paranoid, John said coldly. Tell me I'm being unreasonable, how I should be more understanding. John turned to Moriarty, who was fidgeting. I should thank you. At least you pulled your hand away when I arrived. I'm not sure if my dear wife would have done that. Esther gasped. Tears formed in her eyes. She felt sick, dizzy. The man in front of her didn't look like her husband. It wasn't just his strange clothes, it was his cold eyes and cruel smile. Then she realized his eyes showed pure hatred. I should apologize for interrupting, John sneered. I should have let you finish, or go to a room to continue your cheating. His voice was harsh and strained. Esther trembled, tears running down her cheeks. No, John, please, it's not what it looks like. I never... Her voice faded. John let out a laugh without joy. No, Esther, it's exactly what it looks like. Your old lover shows up and you can't wait to be with him. How long has he been with you, huh? No wonder you've been so unhappy with me. No wonder you've been so unhappy with me lately, he continued. Your Jim must have incredible skills. How did it feel, Esther? How? Did you enjoy knowing I'd feel humiliated? John's voice turned into a hiss, spit flying. "Wait a minute, buddy," Moriarty interrupted, but he stopped when he saw John's rage. "Get out, you scumbag, but listen, keep looking over your shoulder. One day I'll be there. Maybe not tomorrow, next week, or even next month. But someday I'll be there," John warned. "And when you see me, that'll be the day I kill you, I promise. You might want to go far away, but that won't help you much. Now get out before I smash your head." Moriarty didn't wait. He quickly left, almost running. John chuckled grimly, watching him go. Then he turned back to his wife, who stared at him in horror. She never heard him speak like that before. Everything felt unreal. John looked at her messy clothes, and his anger grew. He sat and wondered what went wrong between them. Was it him? Was he a bad husband? Or was Esther just unhappy with him? John suddenly realized he didn't care. It didn't matter why. Esther's voice, full of emotion, broke his thoughts. "John, please. I lost control. I let things go too far. Please forgive me. I was happy about the Simmons contract and lost control. I'm so sorry." Her voice faded as she cried. John just looked at her. "Shut up, Esther. I don't want to hear more lies," he muttered. He removed the newspaper, showing her red panties on the table. John paused, listening to her sobs. "I remember these," he said, touching the fabric. "I gave them to you for your birthday almost a year ago. You said scarlet was your favorite color. Maybe you should take these and make a big A to wear on your dress." "Oh, but we don't do that anymore, do we? That's a shame. Maybe we should. It could help others keep them safe," John thought. "You told me you would save these for a special occasion." He paused, remembering you never wore them, at least not for me. "Esther, did you? But you wore them. Now you wear them for your new lover today." His voice became bitter. "Stay here and be with Moriarty. You don't have to worry about me finding out now, but don't come home. Don't come home yet. Wait until I am gone. I'll leave in a day or two. Make sure you don't show up until then. I don't want to see you, Esther. I don't want you near me. Just stay away until I am gone. Just stay away," John continued in a dull tone. "I'm filing for divorce." He looked up at her and she gasped, turning pale. "We'll split everything, but you can have the house. I'll never step inside it again. I'll just take my clothes and personal items. Items? Oh, and my research materials. I need them for my work, Esther, the work you always mocked. We'll split everything else." "That's fair," John said, his mouth twisted in a grimace. "Don't fight it, Essie. If you do, I'll tell what I saw tonight and it'll ruin your career. Oh, and your lovers too. We don't want that, do we?" Keeping his eyes on hers, John picked up Esther's undergarment and put it into his pocket. Then he stood up and walked away from the table. He stopped, looked back at Esther quietly crying, then turned and kept walking. 3 months had passed since John Watson moved out of their home. He started the divorce process as he promised, and now Esther was fighting it hard, even though he warned her he would expose her cheating with Moriarty. John found something out about himself during this time. He realized he couldn't bring himself to tell their private issues to everyone. Was it because he'd be embarrassed? Or was it that he didn't want to ruin his wife's name? It didn't really matter. Whatever the reason, he couldn't go through with his threat. His lawyer and friend, Sherwood Holmes, told him that Esther would keep fighting the divorce unless John agreed to talk to her privately with no restrictions. Esther said she at least deserved to be heard. If, after that talk, John still wanted the divorce, she would stop fighting it. "That's the deal," said Holmes. "You know Esther, she's a very skilled lawyer, and she could drag this out forever. If you really want the divorce, sit down and listen to her. It won't kill you." John sat still in Holmes's office. He wasn't comforted by the rich leather chairs, the dark wood walls, or the many law books. He looked out the window at the bare trees and the gray sky, then turned back to Holmes and snapped. "Forget her and her demands. She wants to fight the divorce? Let her. I just don't care anymore." Holmes sighed and leaned back in his chair. "John, listen. We've been friends for a long time. I'm more than just your lawyer. I'm your friend. Also, remember, this will cost you a lot of money. Money you don't have, even with the discount this firm is giving you because of me. Sit down and listen to her. Then you can move on with your life." John shook his head. "No, Woody, I won't talk to her. I won't speak with her. I just won't. I know you think I am being stubborn, but I know what she's going to say. Believe me, I could write it out myself. She'll either admit her affair and ask for forgiveness, or she'll try to lie about it. I don't want to hear it. There's nothing she can say that will change my mind. Woody, I know you're right about the cost of this. You can tell Esther that I won't talk to her, and she can do whatever she wants. Hold off on the divorce. It doesn't matter anymore. I have no plans to get married again, probably never will. John smiled a bit and let out a bitter laugh. Maybe she'll agree to the divorce when she finds another guy and wants to move on. I don't care anymore, Holmes shrugged. Okay, John, I'll let her know. We'll just hold all the papers until you're ready. But do me a favor. When you feel up to it, give me a call. Let's have dinner. It's been ages since we got together. He paused, his voice fading. John stood up and put a hand on his friend's shoulder. Damn. I'm sorry, Woody. It's been, over a year since Mary died. Here I am talking about my problems, and I know you're still hurting. Of course I'll call you. Give me a few days. We'll have dinner and a few beers. I'd really like that. Holmes smiled and walked John out of the office. He stood for a moment, shaking his head in sympathy, watching his friend walk out the front door into the cold, gray afternoon. It didn't take John long to drive home. He parked in the driveway and slowly walked through the front door of his townhouse. He paused for a moment, looking around at his new rental. He had moved in about 6 weeks ago and had spent a fortune on paint, new carpets, and furniture. He had promised himself he would start his new life in a nice place. He wouldn't live like a monk. Forget it. He would enjoy his single life. After all, he was only 46. There was life after marriage, a marriage that he hoped would end someday. John paced around his new place, glancing about while still annoyed at Esther's stubbornness. There was a big living room and dining room, a modern kitchen with fancy stone countertops, and 2 up-to-date bathrooms, one connected directly to the master bedroom. But the real deal clincher was the small, added room right off the living room, which you could reach through sliding glass doors. Inside was a modern hot tub with all the latest features. John smiled as he looked at it. Over the last few weeks, he had spent many hours relaxing in that tub, easing his tight muscles and calming his worried mind. Meanwhile, Irene was in a heated argument. "Damn it, Tony, it's not the end of the world," she shouted. "It's just not working, you know that. It was great, but it's just not working." "You're just scared of your mother," Tony retorted. "She wants you to marry a nice Italian girl. Well, I'm not good enough for her." "Get out, Tony. Who needs you?" Irene's voice cracked, and she turned away so he wouldn't see her tears. Tony stood still for a moment, looking truly sorry, then quietly left, closing the door behind him. Irene sighed and collapsed on the sofa. Her tears stopped, and a small, ironic smile appeared on her face. It wasn't that she really loved Tony. It was just so frustrating that she couldn't keep a man. "What's wrong with me?" she wondered. "Why can't I find someone who truly loves me? After all these years, why can't I find someone to share my life with?" Taking a deep breath, Irene headed to the bathroom, sat down, and relieved herself. She stepped into the shower and let the hot water wash over her, feeling some tension melt away. She quickly washed, then stepped out and dried herself with a towel. After hanging up the towel, she reached for her robe and paused to look at herself in the mirror. She saw a tall, mature woman in the prime of her life. Her dark hair was now shorter and framed her face. Her light olive skin was flawless. She grimaced and muttered, "Darn it!" then threw the bathroom door open. Irene impatiently threw the robe over her shoulders and flopped onto the bed. Picking up a novel she had started, she tried to get into the boring plot but soon tossed the book aside. "Darn it, I need a drink," she said aloud. She got up, went to the kitchen, grabbed a glass, some ice, and a splash of bourbon. Back in the living room, Irene sank into a cozy chair, sipped her drink, and wondered where her life was going. "Stop feeling sorry for yourself, girl," she muttered. "I need some company. I need to get out of here." Suddenly, an idea came to her, and she picked up the phone to dial John. "Hey, it's Irene. Are you busy? I'd really like to come over." She listened to his reply. "That's great. I'll see you in an hour or sooner." As darkness fell, Irene pulled into John's driveway, quickly got out of her car, and walked to the front door. Before she could ring the bell, the door opened, and John pulled her into the warm hallway. "Perfect timing, sweetie," John said. "The delivery guy just left and the food's still hot. Come on, give me your coat and let's eat." John laughed. Wow, John, you sure know how to sweep a girl off her feet. This is perfect. I didn't realize I was hungry, but now that you mention it, I'm starving. Lead the way. They chatted while eating takeout Chinese food. After throwing the empty containers in the trash, they moved to the living room with the last bit of wine from an open bottle. They filled their glasses, and John tossed the empty bottle into the trash. They continued their friendly chat until their glasses were empty. John considered opening another bottle, but then looked at Irene. You know what? Enough with the small talk. Let's get serious. He got up and fetched a good bottle of scotch from the bar cabinet, pouring a generous amount into 2 glasses over ice. He handed one to Irene and sat down in an easy chair across from her. He took a sip and looked at his friend. Okay, sweetie, lay it on me. What's bothering you? Tell Uncle John, he said gently. Irene laughed and sipped her drink. You know, this is really good. I never realized you had such good taste in liquor. John sat quietly, watching her. Oh, darn it, she muttered. I guess you know me better than that. It's Tony. He broke up with me today. For heaven's sake, John, what's wrong with me? Why can't I keep a man? She asked, sounding pained. You really want to know, Irene? Because if you do, it's no big mystery. But you need to be sure you want to know. Irene sat quietly for a moment, surprised at his words. What do you mean? If you knew, why didn't you tell me before? Why keep quiet, John? She was clearly upset. John raised his hands defensively. Wait, Irene. Esther never let me say anything to you. She didn't want to hurt your feelings. I didn't agree, but I thought she might be right. But now who cares what she thinks? John sneered and then laughed. It's you, sweetie. It's your fault. And I'll tell you why. You always pick the wrong guys. Renee, I've tried to tell you this before, but you never understood. Why do you think that? It's not like we hit it off with any of those guys you brought round. Listen, John said seriously, you're beautiful and smart. You can get almost any guy you want, but the ones you pick hurt you. Think about it. Irene just sat there with her mouth open. At first, she felt a flash of anger in her eyes. It was hard for her to hear what John had just said. He implied, no, he flat out said, that she didn't know how to pick good men. But she wasn't dumb. After feeling angry for a moment, she thought about what John said, and she realized he was right. The guys she dated were jerks. She had never had a good relationship that ended well. Son of a gun, she whispered. You're right. Why didn't I see that before? Why do I do that? Maybe I need to see a doctor about it. Seriously, now that I think about it, you're right. Maybe I am a loser too, and that's why I pick losers. No, John protested, standing up. Let me refill our drinks. While he was getting more drinks, he continued. You're not a loser, don't think that. But maybe it's a good idea to talk to someone who can help. That could really be a smart move. John hesitated and then chuckled sadly. Maybe I need that too. I'm not exactly thinking straight either. They looked at each other for a moment. John tried not to laugh. Irene smiled a little, and soon they were both laughing hard. Boy, we're quite the pair, Irene said, taking a big sip from her glass. At least you had almost 20 good years with one woman. She immediately put her hand over her mouth. She saw John's eyes start to tear up. Sorry, John, that just slipped out. I didn't mean it. Nah, that's okay, Renee, you're right. Those were mostly good years. That's why it's so sad now. I always wonder how many other men she was with during those good years. When you lose trust in someone you love, everything becomes doubtful. John said sadly. Enough with that. Let's fill these glasses again. I'm glad you came over, Renee. We can drink together. John laughed. So the two friends sat, chatted nicely, and slowly got a bit drunk, which was their goal. They both knew binge drinking would make them feel worse later, especially the next morning. But right now, they didn't care. Johnny, slurred Irene, use what's that tub outside? The spa? John asked, trying to focus. Hey, good idea, let's get in the spa, come on. John stumbled over to her and they walked with their arms around each other into the small alcove. Oh, no swimsuit, Johnny, Irene said sadly. I didn't bring a bikini. Forget it. Let's just go skinny dipping, John laughed. Irene laughed too. All right, she said, and they began to undress. Soon they were both naked. John always kept the spa heated since he used it often, so it was warm enough even now. They paused for a moment, looking at each other. Wow, John muttered, coming out of his drunken haze a bit. You look amazing. Irene blushed a little, but didn't feel shy. "You don't look bad either, Johnny," she said. This time John blushed. He laughed and said, "See, you're not so bad after all. Come on, let's get in." He helped her into the warm, bubbling water. They sat next to each other and enjoyed the jets of water on their bare skin. They were very aware of each other's closeness. John's mind was foggy from the whiskey, but he knew he had to be careful. He didn't want to ruin his friendship with Irene by doing something wrong. Irene, however, wasn't as worried. Should I make a move, or will he? Will he get mad? Oh, whatever, she thought. She moved closer to John. John felt it and pulled away gently after a few moments, splashing water on his face. "I'm sorry, Renee. I don't know what happened. I just can't do this." He put his face in his hands, shaking a little. Irene helped John out of the spa and into one of the soft robes hanging on the deck. She put on another robe herself and led John to the bedroom, laying him down like a child. It seemed he fell asleep the moment his head hit the pillow. Knowing she couldn't drive in her condition, Irene went to the second bedroom and crawled into bed, trying to sleep. But she couldn't. She realized that John was not available, even though he was separated from Esther. She knew he never would be, and deep down, she knew she didn't truly love John. He was her best friend, but there was no romantic love between them. Her eyes filled with tears, not because of that, but because of the pain her friend was going through. The sad thing was that John loved Esther with a special kind of love. Her cheating would haunt him forever. "Irene, I know I messed up, and I know I messed up badly, but John is wrong. I never had an affair with Jim or any other man. He thinks I've been cheating on him for months now, and I can't get him to sit down and talk to me." Esther sat quietly, her mind racing. "I have to convince him he's wrong," she thought. "He needs to know that what he saw was a one-time thing." The past few months had been really tough for Esther. She had lost weight and looked tired and pale. She barely had energy to do anything besides work. Irene decided to visit her. Irene knew John was having a hard time, and seeing Esther confirmed her fears that Esther was also struggling. "I think I understand, Esther," Irene said gently. "But I don't get John. I've tried talking to him, but he won't listen. He won't see or talk to you. He's never been this stubborn before." Esther whispered, almost to herself. "I think I've hurt him badly, Irene. He won't even face me, and I can't blame him." Tears filled Esther's eyes. "Every time I think I've no more tears left, they just keep coming." She stood up, wiped her tears, and asked, "Renee, could you please stay with me for a while? I need to do something, and I really need your support. Can you stay?" "Of course I'll stay," Irene replied. "I just wish there was more I could do to help." Esther glanced at her watch and reached for the phone. "I hope he's still in his office," she muttered and dialed a number. "Hi, Woody, it's Esther. Could I come see you in the morning?" She paused, listening. "Yes, I've decided to give John what he wants. No conditions. Thanks, Woody." She hung up and turned to Irene. "I'm going to give John the divorce. He deserves to move on. This is the least I can do." Irene looked shocked. "Esther, wait, this is crazy. You both love each other. Maybe I can talk to John again. Please, let me try." Shaking her head, Esther replied, "No, John needs to start over. Fighting the divorce isn't fair to him. Our marriage is over, and it's my fault. I can't fool myself anymore." Her voice grew firmer, almost breaking. "Just stay with me for a while, please, Irene." "I'll stay as long as you need," Irene said, squeezing Esther's cold hands. "Esther is not going to fight the divorce." Meanwhile, John Watson was stunned by what he had just heard from his lawyer. "Woody, what's going on? Is Esther trying to pull a fast one? She doesn't give in this easily." After a pause, he said, "Okay, let her come. Let's see if she signs without any conditions. I won't hold my breath, though. Dinner? Sure. I know where that is. I'll meet you there at 7 o'clock. See you then." Walking around his home, John was deep in thought. He felt uneasy, though he should be happy. This is what he wanted, right? Wandering from room to room, he finally sank into a chair. "What's wrong with me?" he muttered. "I need a beer," he decided, heading for the kitchen. The phone rang just as he opened the fridge. "Hello? Oh, hi, Irene, what's up?" "Forget it, Irene. Oh, sure. I'm meeting Woody tonight. You can join us. Actually, I'll pick you up around 6:30. We'll go together. And no more nagging, okay? See you tonight. Bye." Later that evening, John and Irene walked into the restaurant. Seeing Woody already at the table, John introduced them quickly. He noticed they were acting shy. Irene's cheeks were red, and Woody seemed reluctant to let go of her hand. "Hey, you two," laughed John. "You look like teenagers on a first date. Do you like each other?" Both Woody and Irene blushed and quickly sat down. "Johnny, enough," Irene said, smiling shyly. "You're embarrassing us." The evening went on, with little talk about John's divorce. They all agreed to wait until Esther actually signed the papers. For now, it was just a waiting game. Now, trying to guess what would happen next didn't make sense. So at dinner, the talk was all about Woody Holmes and Irene Adler. John felt left out, but it didn't bother him. He just watched and listened with a relaxed smile as his friends grew more interested in each other. It was clear they liked each other a lot. John thought this could be really good for both of them. Maybe Woody could finally move on from his wife's death, and Irene might have found someone decent. After dinner, John went to the bathroom, washed his hands quickly, and walked back to the table. When he sat down, Woody looked nervous and started to stutter. John gave him a look. John," Woody began, blushing. "I hope this is—" "Oh, stop," John interrupted. "Woody wants to drive me home. I hope you don't mind," Irene said quickly, her face also turning pink. "Well, I don't know about that," John teased. "Remember, I'm the one who brought you here and drove," Irene reminded him. John laughed and looked warmly at his friends. "Of course not. I don't mind at all," he said. "Esther, it's good to see you, even if things aren't perfect," Holmes said, holding her hand. "Please come in and sit." "Thanks, Woody. You know this is hard for me. Let's get it over with quickly. I just want it done," Esther responded. "I understand why John doesn't want to see or talk to me," she added. Holmes noticed how tired and pale she looked. He sighed, understanding her pain. "I'm really sorry." "Yes, I tried to change his mind, but John can be stubborn. I'm glad you're not fighting this. It's better for both of you," Holmes said. Esther nodded and asked for the papers. Woody gave her the documents and she signed without reading them, surprising him. "You're not going to read it?" Woody asked. "Why? I trust you, Woody. I know you're a good lawyer. You know what to do, and John won't cheat me. He has more integrity than I do," she said softly, blushing slightly. "Esther," Woody said sharply, "I know this is hurting you a lot. I will talk to John again. Now that you signed without mentioning anything beforehand, he might be less stubborn. He probably felt forced to talk before," Woody explained. Esther shrugged. "Whatever, Woody. If he doesn't change his mind, I'll understand. I ruined our marriage. I hoped we could at least be friends." She paused, tearing up again. "Sorry, Woody. I need to get a grip," she whispered, standing up. "Please forgive me. I have to go," she said, hurrying out of the office. Woody shook his head sadly, deep in thought. Then he reached for the phone. "Hello, Renee? It's me. Esther just left my office and I'm really worried about her. She signed the divorce papers without reading them. Surprised isn't the word," Woody said. "Listen, I know you're close to John. Can you meet him and tell him it's over? Tell him Esther didn't read the divorce conditions. We might make him feel a bit guilty for not talking to her," Woody laughed. "Yeah, we are meddling, but it's for a good reason. I'm glad you agree. We know John will calm down and be reasonable. He should talk to her, and I think he will," Woody said. "Okay, you handle it. Are we still on for tonight? Great. I'll pick you up around 7. Bye, honey." John Watson approached the door of his old home with some anxiety. He felt a lump in his throat and sweat on his forehead despite the cold weather. He stood there wondering if listening to Irene and Woody was a good idea. He didn't want to bring up old pain. He didn't want to think about Esther's betrayal. The memory of the hotel still made him shiver and feel sick. His last talk with Irene still bothered him. Irene had repeated what Esther told her. Esther wasn't trying to excuse her actions, saying it was due to the success of a project, too much alcohol, and Jim being there flattering her. "Bull," John had exploded. "You're saying she just loved the man who was there? Knock it off, John." "You know that's not what I mean," Irene had snapped back. They calmed down eventually, and Irene convinced John to meet Esther. But when the door opened and Esther stood there, lit from behind, John almost turned away. "John, please come in," she pleaded. John stood tall, forced a weak smile, and stepped inside. "Okay, thank you, Esther," he muttered as he entered the house that once felt like home. John scanned the room with quick glances. Nothing looked different. Everything was just as it had always been, except for a thin layer of dust on everything. This surprised him because Esther always kept things clean. She hated dirt. He stayed silent. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, John," Esther said softly. "I truly appreciate it, and I promise I won't take more time than needed." "All right, Esther," John replied, his voice cold. "Woody and Irene convinced me to come. I don't see how this will help anyone, but since you're not fighting the divorce, I gave in and agreed to meet." Esther swallowed hard. She knew this talk would be tough, but she was ready for it. She had to tell John the truth and admit her huge mistake. She hoped he might forgive her. "John, please just listen. It will help me," she said, her eyes pleading. John paused, his gaze piercing, then nodded and sat down stiffly. "Okay, Esther, I'm listening." Esther took a deep breath. "John, believe me when I say I've never been with Jim or any man other than you. I had no plan to do that. I know what you saw that night makes it hard to believe, but it's the truth," she explained. John cut in sharply. "The truth is rarely pure and never simple." Esther blushed and begged him again to listen. She fought back tears. "I can't explain my foolish actions that night. I've thought about it a lot, wondering why I let it happen. I have no excuses. I've been ashamed and tormented myself. I kept asking why I allowed Jim to do that." She couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Her cheeks were wet. "I wish I had a simple answer. The only reasons I can think of were the joy and relief from finishing the contract successfully and the amount of alcohol I drank. You know, I haven't had more than a glass of wine since then." John sat with a blank face, struggling to control his anger. Despite his feelings, he believed her when she said she hadn't slept with Jim or anyone else. But this belief brought him no comfort, only more inner conflict. "I also felt a bit angry with you," Esther admitted. "I thought you should have been more supportive. I know that sounds unreasonable, but that's how I felt. It's no excuse, but it's the truth. I've replayed that night in my mind over and over. I know how shallow all this sounds and how horrible I feel. But believe me, John, you can't hate me more than I hate myself." She grabbed a tissue and wiped her eyes. "Sorry for the tears, John. I promised myself I wouldn't cry, but here I am breaking another promise," she whispered. "John, is there any way we can save our marriage? Counseling or something? Anything?" John looked at her for a moment, sighed, and sank back in his chair. He felt empty, like he had lost something precious. "Esther, answer this. If I hadn't shown up that night, would you have ended up in bed with Jim? Would you have let him seduce you? Would you have been unfaithful?" Esther gasped. Deep down, she knew what John was saying was true. She would have ended up in Jim's bed. She turned even paler, realizing this truth. But John waved her away. "You see, Esther, that's the point. You cheated on our marriage when you let him kiss you. You cheated when you kissed him back passionately. You cheated when you let him undress you and touch you. You promised yourself to me, your husband, and you broke that promise." John's voice rose, but he took a deep breath to calm down. He didn't want an argument. "Do you understand what I'm saying, Esther?" Esther nodded, finally understanding the depth of her actions. She felt sick and hopeless, tears falling again. John looked at her with pity. "I feel sorry for you," he said gently. "I feel sorry for us. Maybe it's not all your fault. Maybe I too share some of the blame. Maybe I should have been more helpful, more kind. But that doesn't make up for what you did that night. Anyway, I have to ask myself a tough question. What would be easier for me? Is it easier to live with doubt or regret? Is it possible to move past this and stay married? Can I spend my life not trusting you, always wondering if you'll betray me again? Can I keep looking over my shoulder, waiting to see if you'll mess up again, or should I live without you? Feeling sad that our marriage ended, sad that you didn't love me enough to stay faithful, sad that I wasn't enough for you, sad that even though I forgive you, I can't forget what happened." John stopped and felt tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Essie, I can't live with doubt. Regret is easier." John stood still for a moment, feeling sorry for his wife, who was curled up on the couch crying. He turned and slowly walked out the door into the night. Hey, listeners! If you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.